Microsoft Excel has got all sorts of different functions, and they've broken these functions up into various categories. Earlier in this course, we were taking a look at more logic-based or conditionally based functions. If function, sum if, count if error. Now we're going to take a look at the lookup and reference category, and we're going to take a look at 3 or actually 4 of the more popular lookup and reference functions. And we're going to start out with perhaps the most popular lookup and reference function, the VLOOKUP or vertical lookup. Now, before we jump in and take a look at the inner workings of the vertical lookup or VLOOKUP function, let's talk about the sample that we have here. What are you going to use this for, and why is it so important for you? So open in front of you, I've got the exercise file that comes with this course, and I'm currently on the VLOOKUP function worksheet. Now we're actually going to be working with 2 worksheets. This one, and right next door, the master employee list. This is going to allow us to combine between both of these worksheets here. So first, here's the setup. So on this VLOOKUP worksheet, I've got a simple but incomplete list. I've got some employee IDs, and I've got some samples of the vertical lookup already completed that are getting last names. Now these last names are actually contained, or where I'm getting the data from, is on the master employee list. If I give that one a click, here I've got the complete list. I've got a list here of employee IDs, last names, first names, departments, and so on. This would be considered the master list. Now, let's imagine some department has come to you and said, hey, I need to get all of these employees' information. All I've got is their IDs. Here you go. They give you a list of IDs, all these employees. Now it's up to you to go get the relevant information that they now need about those employees. Well, you ever done this manually? You ever grab a list of IDs or some numeric value identifying some record and then jumping over and kind of manually picking through the list? Oh, here's 1290. Their name was Cooper. I'm going to copy and paste that to the other worksheet. That's a lot of work to go through. Very, very manual process. Well, this is the idea of the VLOOKUP. The vertical lookup will take some ID from us, some numeric value that we give it, and say, hey, vertical lookup, I've got this ID. It's 1054. I want you to jump into this list over here called master employee list, find vertically, right, it's a VLOOKUP, find the employee ID 1054 in the first column of that list. It'll travel vertically looking for it. When you find it, bring the first name back to me, or bring the department back to me, or whatever it is that you're asking for. This is the VLOOKUP function. It's a simple lookup. Give it some value, tell it where to find that value. Once it finds it, tell it what you want in connection with that value. Let's try this out. I'm going to go into cell C3. This is on the vertical lookup or VLOOKUP function worksheet. Now, I want to get the first name for employee number 1054. So I'm going to go up to my Formulas tab. I'm going to go into Lookup and Reference, and I'll find VLOOKUP. It's all the way down at the bottom. All right, and here's the argument window for the VLOOKUP function. So it's got 4 things that it wants from us in order for it to complete this task of finding the first name based on these IDs. The first thing it needs is, well, hey, I know you want first name eventually, but how am I going to find the correct first name for you? Well, the lookup value. This is going to be the ID, A3 or 1054. So, hey, Excel or VLOOKUP, go look for this value. It's inside of A3. Now, where am I going to look for it? That's the next argument, the table array. Great, you've given me this ID 1054. Well, where do you want me to go look for it? Well, table array, I'm going to go down to master employee list, and I'm going to grab this entire list here. Starting in A3, then I'm going to do Control-Shift down arrow on my keyboard. This will grab that entire column. And then I'm going to do Control-Shift right arrow. I'm going to grab the entire list from A1 to I38. So we got the value you're looking for. We've now told it where to look for it. And by default, a vertical lookup looks vertically through the first column of the table array, the list that you just specified here. Now, before I go back to the other worksheet, the next one, call index num. Well, I'm looking for this. I'm going to find it here. What do you want me to return back to you? That's what the column index num is. Well, I need you to return first name, which is in column number 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to say column index num is equal to 3. So find this for me, look for it over here, and return the third column's value back to me. Now the last one here, the last argument, this is optional, although for me I'd say like 95+% of the time I use it. What this is, and if you just click into one of these arguments, you get a brief little description down below. It's a logical value to find the closest match in the first column sorted in ascending order, put in the word true or leave it blank. If you want to find the exact match, and this really deals with what it's looking up, this A3 value, this 1054. To find the exact match, you're going to put the word false in there. So for me, thinking this is employee information, if it can't find employee number 1054 over in that master list, I don't want the closest employee to that number. I want the exact employee, and if you can't find it, then don't return anything back to me or give me the standard error. So in this case, I'm going to put the word false. And that's it. 4 little things. What am I looking for? Where am I going to find it? What do you want it returned back to you? And whether or not you want the exact match or not. That's it. I hit OK. There's Howard. Howard Smith is employee number 1054. And if I just confirm this, master employee list, there it is, Howard Smith. I'll go back, and I'm going to finish it off. I'll grab that little box in the corner, just drag this down, and now I've got all the first names for these employees. Try this out. Open up the example file, complete the first name, jump over to department, do pay rate, complete these lookup values based on the master employee list. We're going to take a look at a very closely related function to the VLOOKUP. It's kind of the brother or sister function of the VLOOKUP. This is called HLOOKUP. Now you might recall in the previous lecture, the VLOOKUP, V stood for vertical. In this case, this is the HLOOKUP, which stands for horizontal. Now really, the difference between the two really depends on the layout of your data. Now let me just revisit the VLOOKUP for just a moment. I'm going to hop back to master employee list. When you tell the VLOOKUP to go look into a list for a specific value, it looks into the first column vertically. That's why it's called the VLOOKUP. An HLOOKUP, on the other hand, horizontal, will look into a list, such as this. This is the master inventory list. This one will look horizontally through the first row of the list. So it just depends on how your data is laid out. Whether the value you're looking for is vertically, it's like a part of the records, or perhaps it's a header, a horizontal header at the top of your list that you're looking for. Other than that, they're practically identical. Take a look. This is the HLOOKUP. So I'm going to go back to the HLOOKUP tab. And what I'd like to do here is I want to capture the inventory for the different warehouses for this product called XP200. Now on the master inventory list, we've got all the different products. There's the XP200 and the different units, the stock that we have for the different warehouses. So here's the lookup. I'm going to do warehouse inventory 2. Number 1's already done for you. There's the example. Now I'm inside of cell B6. So once again, back to my formulas tab, back to lookup and reference, and I'm going to find HLOOKUP. There it is. Now this opens up the argument window, and if you take a moment, look this over, this window looks almost identical to the VLOOKUP that we just got done talking about in the prior lecture. So first thing it needs to know, what am I looking for? Well, my lookup value is going to be XP200, B3. The next thing it wants to know is, great, I'm looking for this, but where am I going to look for it? So the table array is going to be on the master inventory list, and I'm going to go grab this list here from A2 down to G5. Now, I've told it what it's looking for. I told it where to find it. Remember HLOOKUP, horizontal. It's now traveling horizontally through the first row. It finds XP200. Now it wants to know, hey, which row index num, which row do you want to return back once I find it? Well, for me, there's XP200. I want warehouse inventory number 2. So I'm going to get row number 1, 2, 3. I'll tell it row index num is 3. And then range lookup, just like before, it is optional, but in most cases I use it. I'm going to say false because I want it to find the exact match. And that's it. I hit OK, and there's my 110, warehouse inventory 2. And if I hop over just to confirm, XP200, warehouse number 2 is 110. That's it. 4 little things. Very, very similar. You master one of these, you've mastered both of them. And remember, it just depends on how your data is laid out. Really dictates which one you use. Are you traveling vertically, like a standard kind of setup of a list? Or are you looking at perhaps headers that are horizontal along the top of your list? Try this one out. Open up the exercise file, hop over to the HLookup function worksheet, and find warehouse 2 inventory and warehouse 3 inventory. Microsoft Excel's VLOOKUP function is perhaps one of the most common, one of the most popular, more advanced type functions. But it has some limitations. A VLOOKUP, let's talk about it for just a moment. It's a vertical lookup. And what it essentially does is it takes a value, such as an ID, like what I have on the screen right here, employee ID number 1054, takes that value, and then goes into a list, such as this master employee list here. It looks through the first column of the list, and it looks vertically through that list. Now think about this for a moment. What if your master list, like the one that we're looking at here, its first column was not the employee ID? Maybe it was the department, or last name, or first name, or some other column was the first column in the list. Employee ID was maybe 3, 4, it was someplace in the middle of the list. Well, a vertical lookup wouldn't be effective in that situation. You'd have to redesign your list essentially by moving the employee ID to the first column within the lists. And that's perhaps not something that we can do or something that you want to do within your lists. Something else about the VLOOKUP. Once again, it's a great, great feature. Very, very popular. Very, very common. But it's also very resource intensive. If you've got a lot of VLOOKUPs happening within your workbook or HLOOKUPs, your workbook's going to tend to slow down when it calculates the data. You got hundreds of rows in there with hundreds of VLOOKUPs. You open up the workbook, you might be sitting there for a little while waiting for it to update its calculation. Well, in steps, 2 functions that I want to discuss here. These 2 functions used together, they're called index and match, are going to remove these inadequacies that the VLOOKUP has. You don't have to worry about the lookup value being in the first column of your list. You can look in either direction, left or right, for your returning value. And they're tended to be more efficient for your system. Okay? So let's take a look at how you use the index and match function. And I want to talk about using them independently first, just so we get an understanding of what index and match is. And then we'll take a look at using them together. So take a look. I'm here inside the example file once again. I'm on the VLOOKUP worksheet. And here I've got my index and match column and the index and match single column. So first we're going to talk about using them independently, and then we'll talk about nesting these functions together to simulate the idea of a VLOOKUP. So I'll watch this. Here's first the index. So an index function, essentially your Excel document's a big index. It's a big grid. You know, if we look at this data over here, like last names, it's just a column of rows, right? A column of values here in row format. And if we think of this as an index, we've got row number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, and so on. If I grab multiple columns here, maybe I've got last name and first name, and I want to find Mark. I want to know what position Mark, here it is right here, what position Mark is in this index, this group of data. Well, it's in the second column, and it's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th row. So second column, 7th row within this index, this collection of data. Okay? So watch this. Here's the index function. I'll jump up here into G3, and I'm going to create the index. I'll hop up to my Formulas tab. I'm going to go into Lookup and Reference, and let's find the one called Index. Now, this is going to be a bit different than what you perhaps experience with other Microsoft Excel functions. There are two different flavors of working with this function. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the common one, just the first one there, array. What's your collection of data? What row number or column number are you looking for within this array? So I'll go ahead and hit OK. All right, so it wants to know 3 things. I'm really only going to take advantage of 2 of them. Array and row num are both bold, signifying that these are required arguments that this function needs. Column num, not bold, so it's optional. But if you did have multiple columns, such as last name, first name, and department selected, well, which column do you want to get out of this? So my array, let's say as an example, I just want to look for first names. So my array, I'm going to grab the first name column here. I'm just grabbing from C2 to C18. And let's see, I want to know what's inside of the 7th row. So I'll tap my 7 and hit my tab key here, and I'll hit OK. And there's Mark. So it's just a big index. It's a big collection of data. They're calling it an array, an indexed array. In position 1 of this particular array, first names, we got first name. In the second index, we got Howard. In the third index, we got Joe, so on and so on. 7th index, we got Mark. So this is our index function, and it returns data back to us based on a position. All right, so keep that in your mind. Let's try a match. I'm going to hop over to the match column, and once again, back up to Formulas, back into Lookup and Reference, and let's find the match function. All right, now, whereas the index function, we gave it a numeric value, such as 7, and it returned to us a value in the 7th position of that index of that array. Now, here's what the match does. First thing, wants to know, hey, well, what am I looking up? What am I going to look for? Well, let's look for one of the employee IDs this time. So I'm just going to grab this 1075 value. All right. Now it wants to know the second thing. Well, where am I going to look for that? Where am I going to find it at? Well, you're going to find it inside this column over here. I'm going to grab this array, this collection of data, A2 to A18. Now, I am going to take advantage of the third option here. If you're familiar with the VLOOKUP, this might sound familiar to you as well. It's a number, 1, 0, or -1, indicating which value to return. Now, you can actually put some other values in there as well. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in true. I'll hit true here, and what this is going to do is it's going to find the exact match, very similar to that VLOOKUP that we spoke about earlier. So I'm going to put true in there. We'll find the exact match. I don't want the closest thing to it. And I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now remember, the index returned a value back to us based on a position. This time, it returns the position of the data back to us. So hey, I told it to find 1075, right? That's in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th position. So now with match, we can find a piece of data by its position. With index, we can find a value based on its position. All right, so those are two separate ones. Now, FYI, more than likely, you probably won't use these independently of each other. More likely than not, the magic really comes into play when you nest them, when you bring them together, index and match. Let's take a look. Let's try this together. Inside of my I column, I'm going to go into I3, and I'm going to use the index and match function to simulate the same kind of concept that a VLOOKUP does, but a much more robust, a much more efficient method to performing a lookup. All right. So my first step here is I'm going to actually use the index function. So I'm going to go up to my Formulas tab again, back to Lookup and Reference, and I'll find index. All right, once again, I'll pick the array flavor. I'll hit OK. All right. Remember, it wants to know 3 things here from us. So first thing, well, where am I going to be looking for data? Well, I guess first off, what is it that we're looking for? Well, let's say, you know what, I want to look for last names. Okay. Well, I've got a list of last names right here, but I've also got a list of last names on this master employee list. So let's actually hop over to master employee list, and I'm going to grab the last name column here. I'm just going to click up in the B1, and I'll do Control Shift down arrow, grab all of that. There's the array. All right. Now, I'm looking for a specific last name. Now, we know that utilizing the index function, I could give it a numeric value. I could say, hey, return what's back inside the 10th column or 10th row, or the 5th row, or the 1st row. But you know what? I don't want to just give it a numeric value and say, well, just return whatever you find in that position. I'm looking for a very specific last name. Well, the last name that I'm looking for is going to be based off of an ID. All right. So now, in order for us to be able to determine where the ID is at so that it gives me back the appropriate last name, I'm now going to nest a match function. So inside of my row num, rather than just some number I'm throwing out there, I'm going to nest the match function to find the appropriate employee ID's position inside the master employee list. So now inside my row num, I'm going to bring in match, open up a parentheses. Now to make this a little bit cleaner, I'm going to click up here in my formula bar inside the match section. And this will take me into the match arguments. All right, so what am I looking for? Let's see, I'm going to find employee number 1067's name. Let's grab that. Well, the lookup array, where's it going to find this at? Well, for me, I'm going to go back to master employee lists. It's going to find the IDs inside the A column. So I'll go to A1, Control Shift down arrow. Let's grab all of that. And I'm going to tell it, let's do true here. Let's find the exact match. All right. So now I'm finding where that employee ID is within that other list. Told it what to look for, where it's going to find it at. All right. Now this is just the match function. Let's go back to index. I'm going to click back up here into index. And let's see, am I feeling good about this? We're finding the array of all the names, all the last names, and we're going to use the row num match function to be able to find that position. All right. Now let's see. I'm thinking here. We've got the column. We've got the master employee list there. I think I'm feeling good about this. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Scoot. Is that right? 1067 for Scott. How do you pronounce that? Inside the last name. That looks right to me. I'm going to hop over to my master employee list. Let's look at this. Let's see. 1067. There it is. It's inside of the 4th row. And it was able to find Scott based off of this index and match combination. Very similar to the vertical lookup once again, but the column that it's looking through doesn't have to be the first column. Employee ID could be in any of the columns here. Right? But based on position within this set of data, we can easily and effectively find this data. So try this out. Try it out a few times. Really get a grasp for this. Look for a few different last names or try different things. Look for last names. Look for pay rates. Look for department. Whatever it might be. Based off of employee ID or whatever you want to look for.